My name is Marissa Hale. I'm 32 years old, and I've worn a badge for nearly a decade. People usually think that being a police officer means I've seen it all. Blood on the pavement, families torn apart by violence, lives ruined in seconds. And that's true. But here's the thing. Nothing in all those years of patrols, interrogations, or crime scenes prepared me for the betrayal I discovered in my own home on Christmas Eve. When you grow up in a family that's all about appearances, you learn early how to keep your mouth shut. My brother, Anthony, was the golden child. Slick, sharp, and ambitious. He followed the path my parents carved for him. Private schools, Ivy League law degree, and now a corner office in a firm that bills more in an hour than I make in a week. Me. I chose service over status. My father still can't wrap his head around why his daughter would run toward danger instead of a big paycheck. He calls it a waste. I call it purpose. And then there's my grandmother, Eleanor. She's 78, tougher than she looks, with hands calloused from decades of sewing, cooking, and taking care of everyone else. She's the only one in the family who ever looked at me and saw more than just a cop with a gun. To her, I'm still the little girl who used to curl up beside her and beg for one more story before bed. That night, Christmas Eve, I just finished a double shift. We'd had a string of burglaries in town, and I was running on fumes. My body ached from sitting in the cruiser for 12 hours, and all I wanted was to walk into a warm house, hear some laughter, maybe grab a plate of food before collapsing on the couch. That was the picture I held in my head as I turned down the street toward my parents' house. The neighborhood glowed with lights, red, green, gold, twinkling across roofs and wrapped around trees. Their house was no exception. My father had paid someone to cover every inch with bulbs, so the place looked like a Hallmark card come to life. I parked by the curb, rubbed the tired out of my eyes, and stepped into the cold night air. Snow crunched under my boots as I made my way up the driveway. That's when I saw her. Grandma Eleanor was sitting on the porch, her frail body hunched in a wicker chair. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin nightgown and slippers. Her skin looked ghostly under the porch light, her shoulders trembling from the cold. "Grandma!" My voice cracked in the quiet. I rushed up the steps, dropping to my knees beside her. Her lips were blue, her breath coming out in shaky puffs. "Marissa," she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "Sweetheart." I pulled my jacket off and wrapped it around her shoulders, fury boiling in my chest. "What are you doing out here? It's freezing." She shook her head weakly. "They said, no room for me inside. Said I was in the way." I froze, my stomach twisting into a knot. "No room?" Through the window behind her, I could see the glow of the fireplace, the clink of champagne glasses, the sound of laughter. My mother's shrill voice carried over the Christmas music, followed by Anthony's smug chuckle. They were warm, well-fed, celebrating, and they'd left my grandmother, out here to freeze. I swallowed hard, rage clawing up my throat. "That's not true. You're not in the way. Come on, let's get you inside." "No," she whispered, clutching my arm. "Don't cause trouble. Just let me sit." Trouble. That was her word for it, but what I felt went far beyond that. This wasn't an accident. This was cruelty. I lifted her gently from the chair, her body feather-light in my arms. She whimpered from the cold, pressing her face into my shoulder. As I carried her toward the door, I caught another glimpse through the window. Anthony stood by the fire, his arm draped around his wife's shoulders, holding up a glass as though he were making some grand toast. My father sat in his recliner, grinning, while my mother fussed over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Not one of them glanced toward the porch. Not one of them cared. I shoved the front door open with my boot, the blast of heat and music hitting me like a wall. The laughter cut off instantly. For faces turned toward me. "What the hell is this?" I snapped, lowering Grandma carefully onto the couch, wrapping her in a throw blanket. Why was she outside? In the cold? In nothing but a nightgown? My mother blinked, her lips tightening. "Marissa, lower your voice. You're scaring the guests." "The guests?" My voice trembled with fury. She could have died out there. Anthony rolled his eyes, smirking like he always did when he wanted to make me feel small. "You're being dramatic. Mom said she kept complaining about the noise, so we let her sit outside for a bit of quiet. She wanted that." "That's a lie," I spat. She was freezing. Her lips were blue. Anthony raised his hands in mock surrender. Hey, you're the cop, not me. If you think there's a crime here, by all means, arrest somebody. Otherwise, quit the hero act. This is family business. Family business. The phrase landed like a slap. These were the same people who had raised me, the ones who claimed to value tradition, love, togetherness. And yet, when it came down to it, they treated the woman who sacrificed everything for them as disposable. I looked at Grandma, curled up on the couch, her eyes closed, her frail chest rising and falling. My fury sharpened into something colder, heavier. A promise I made silently to myself. This wasn't just about neglect. This was about betrayal. And if there's one thing I've learned as a cop, it's that betrayal leaves a trail. I was going to find it, follow it, and drag every rotten secret they thought they'd buried into the light. But that moment, that night on the porch, was the beginning. The spark. And once the fire inside me caught, there was no putting it out. If you're still with me, and this story has hit you in the chest, if it reminds you of anything you've seen or lived through, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there listening. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my chest that wouldn't go away. Sleep had been shallow, restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandma's lips turning blue on that porch, her frail hands gripping mine as she begged me not to cause trouble. The words kept echoing in my head, like some cruel reminder of the prison she had been living in. I brewed coffee in my small apartment kitchen, staring out at the snow piling on the windowsill. I couldn't shake the image of my family inside that warm house, sipping champagne and laughing while she nearly froze to death outside. It didn't fit into any box in my mind. I could handle criminals. I could handle liars. I could even handle killers. But my own blood treating my grandmother like garbage? That was a wound deeper than anything I'd ever faced in uniform. I called her that morning, just to check in. Her voice was weak but steady. She said she was fine, said she was resting. But I could hear the hesitation in her tone, the way she tried to protect them even when they didn't deserve it. It made me angrier. She had raised 2 children, my mother and uncle, and then stepped up again when they failed as parents. She cooked, cleaned, babysat, gave up her retirement to help pay bills when my dad lost his job years ago. And now she was being shoved aside like she didn't matter. I couldn't let it go. I drove back to the house that afternoon. Snow was still falling, the road slick with ice, but the drive gave me time to let my fury sharpen into focus. When I pulled into the driveway, Anthony's car was gone, but my mother's SUV sat gleaming in the garage. I stepped inside without knocking, the smell of pine and cinnamon still heavy in the air. My mother was in the kitchen, arranging leftovers into neat containers like nothing had happened. She glanced up when I walked in, her expression tight. "Oh, you're back," she said. "Where's Grandma?" I asked. "In her room. She's resting." My mother's voice was clipped, like she was daring me to question her. I didn't bother answering. I went straight down the hall and pushed open Eleanor's door. She was lying in bed, the blanket pulled up to her chin, her silver hair spread across the pillow. When she saw me, her eyes softened. "Marissa, sweetheart," she whispered. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hand. "Are you warm enough? Did they feed you?" She chuckled faintly. Yes. Don't fuss." I leaned closer. "Grandma, why didn't you tell me they were treating you like this? Why didn't you say something before last night?" Her gaze drifted toward the window. "Because it wouldn't change anything. Your mother and Anthony, they've made up their minds. I didn't want to make you feel torn." Torn. My throat tightened. "I'd pick you over them every damn time." She squeezed my hand, her skin paper-thin, fragile. "You have a good heart. But don't make yourself a target. They won't forgive you if you stand in their way." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just talking about being left outside. There was more. Something bigger, uglier. I could feel it in her voice. Later that evening, after checking in on her again, I went back to the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I came in. "You know what happened last night was unacceptable," I said. She sighed, exasperated. "Marissa, don't start. You always overreact." "Overreact? She could have died." "She exaggerates." She wanted space, she got it. We had guests to think about. Do you know how embarrassing it is when she complains loudly about the music or asks the same question over and over? I stared at her, stunned. She's 78 years old. She's not an inconvenience, she's your mother. My mother finally set her phone down, eyes flashing. And she's been living off us for years. We feed her, we house her, we pay for her medicines. That's bullshit and you know it, I cut in. She gave you her savings. She sold her house and handed you every penny when Dad was out of work. Don't you dare act like she's some freeloader. The silence after that was sharp. My mother's jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing. You don't understand the strain she puts on us. You don't live here. You run off to play cop while the rest of us actually carry the burden. I laughed bitterly. Carry the burden? By throwing her out in the cold. Her face hardened. You've always been dramatic, Marissa. You don't know what it's like to have a real family to take care of. You have no husband, no kids, nothing tying you down. You swoop in when it suits you, then leave. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. She knew how to dig into my soft spots. But I didn't let it show. You're disgusting, I said flatly. And I'm going to prove what you're doing to her. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my chest burning with rage. That conversation confirmed what I already suspected. They didn't just neglect her. They were using her, draining her, and tossing her aside when she wasn't convenient anymore. Over the next week, I started digging. I had the skills. Years on the force had taught me how to trace money, how to spot lies, how to see the cracks people thought they'd hidden. I visited the bank where Grandma's pension was deposited. I couldn't pull records without cause, but I asked questions, made casual conversation with a teller I knew from high school. From the way her eyes darted, the way she fumbled with answers, I knew something was off. I started visiting Grandma more often, sometimes unannounced. I caught little details. Jewelry missing from her dresser, her favorite porcelain figurines gone from the shelf. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, but her eyes betrayed her. She was protecting them, even as they bled her dry. One night, I sat with her in her room, the only light coming from the small lamp on her nightstand. I leaned in close and said, "Grandma, please, tell me the truth. What have they been doing?" She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. Finally, in a broken whisper, she said, "They've been taking my money. All of it. I gave them my savings years ago, but now they use my account like it's theirs. They said it's for groceries, for bills. But I never see the receipts. They even sold your grandfather's watch. I asked Anthony once, and he told me to shut my mouth or I'd be in a nursing home before spring." I sat there frozen, fury pulsing through my veins. The image of my slick, polished brother threatening our grandmother burned into me like a brand. "They can't get away with this," I said, my voice shaking. She grabbed my hand. "Don't make it worse for yourself. Promise me, Marissa." But I couldn't promise her that. Not when I felt the weight of justice pressing down on me. From that night on, I started recording. Small things. My mother's dismissive comments, Anthony's careless remarks when he thought no one was listening. I backed up everything. I took pictures of missing heirlooms, noted down dates and times, anything that painted the picture of what they were really doing. Each visit became a balancing act. Outwardly, I pretended to let it slide. Inwardly, I was building a case. Not just as a cop, but as a granddaughter who refused to let her only true family suffer at the hands of people too selfish to care. The anger became fuel. Every smile my brother flashed, every dismissive tone from my mother, every complicit silence from my father, they all added to the fire. I was no longer just Marissa the cop. I was Marissa the avenger, and I was not going to let this rot stay hidden. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that evil doesn't always look like a masked intruder or a thug in a dark alley. Sometimes it wears a suit, or pearl earrings, and smiles over champagne while the person who gave them everything freezes outside on Christmas Eve. And I was going to burn that mask right off their faces. The first week of January felt like walking around with a storm inside my chest. On the outside, I went through the motions. Patrol shifts, paperwork, the occasional call for a domestic dispute. Inside, I was replaying every moment in that house, every cruel word, every detail my grandmother whispered when she thought no one could hear. My badge gave me a framework for justice, But this wasn't a case I could hand off to detectives or shove into a file. This was personal, and that made it dangerous. I kept showing up at my parents' house, sometimes uninvited, sometimes with an excuse. I told them I was checking on Grandma, making sure she was comfortable. They pretended to tolerate it, but I could see the cracks. My mother's eyes narrowed every time I walked through the door. Anthony's smirk got tighter, like he was losing his patience. My father mostly stayed quiet, but the way he avoided my gaze told me he knew exactly what was happening and chose not to stop it. The real question was how far they had gone. I needed more than my grandmother's word and my suspicions. I needed proof. One afternoon, while my mother was at her weekly church luncheon, I slipped into the office at the back of the house. The desk drawers were locked, but locks didn't mean much to me anymore. I'd seen enough of them on the job to know how to pop one open with a paperclip. Inside, neat stacks of documents lined up like soldiers. Bills, bank statements, insurance forms. I pulled out a folder marked Household Expenses. At first glance, it looked normal. Utilities, mortgage, grocery receipts. But then I saw it. Eleanor Hale's name, listed on withdrawals that had nothing to do with her needs. Thousands of dollars moved from her account into a joint account shared by my parents and Anthony. I snapped photos with my phone, each click a small victory. My heart pounded, sweat dampening the back of my neck as I worked quickly. There were records of checks signed in shaky handwriting. So shaky I knew they weren't hers. Someone had forged her name, and badly. The sound of the garage door opening froze me in place. My mother was home early. I stuffed the papers back, relocked the drawer, and slipped out just as she walked down the hall. She eyed me suspiciously, her lips curling. "What are you doing here again?" she asked. "Checking on Grandma," I said smoothly. Her eyes flicked toward the office door, then back to me. She didn't push it, but I could tell she sensed something. That night, I sat in my apartment with the photos spread across my table. Every line of ink, every date, every forged signature tightened the noose around them. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the weight of what was coming. Taking them down wouldn't just expose their greed, it would destroy what little family tie still existed. But maybe that was already gone the night they put Eleanor on the porch. The next Saturday, Anthony came to the house while I was visiting. He swaggered in, coat slung over his arm, reeking of cologne and arrogance. He didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, he went straight to Grandma's room, poked his head in and said, "How's my favorite lady? Need anything?" "No." "Good." He didn't wait for her answer. He walked back out, smirking as he poured himself a drink from the liquor cabinet. I followed him into the kitchen. "What's your endgame here, Anthony?" He raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. Don't play dumb. I know you've been draining her account. I know you threatened her about the nursing home. What's the plan? Bleed her dry and dump her when she's got nothing left?" He laughed, a sharp sound that grated against my nerves. "You think you know everything because you've got a badge. But this isn't your world, sis. This is family. You want to play cop? Go back to the precinct. This is none of your business." "None of my business?" My voice shook with fury. "She's my grandmother. She's the only reason I survived this family. That makes it my business." Anthony leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Let me give you some advice. Stop digging. You've got nothing, and even if you did, no one would believe you over me. I'm the lawyer, the success story. You're just the cop with an attitude problem. So unless you want to ruin what's left of your career, back off." His words were meant to intimidate me. Instead, they lit the fire hotter. I stared into his smug face and made a promise in silence. I was going to break him. That night, I sat with Grandma while she drifted off to sleep. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale against the pillow. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, my heart aching. She didn't deserve any of this. She deserved peace, warmth, dignity. I whispered, "I swear to you I won't let them hurt you again." The days that followed became a balancing act. I collected what I could without tipping them off: bank photos, overheard conversations, even snippets of their arrogance when they forgot I was in the room. Every insult about how Grandma was dead weight, every sneer about her being a burden, I captured in secret recordings. Piece by piece, I was building the case. But the emotional toll was harder. Being in that house, pretending to stay calm, was like holding a live wire inside me. I wanted to scream, to drag them into the street and expose them for the parasites they were. But I knew timing mattered. If I struck too early, they'd cover their tracks. If I struck too late, Grandma might not survive their cruelty. One evening, my father cornered me in the living room. His eyes were tired, but his voice was sharp. "Marissa, stop coming around so much. You're stirring things up." I stared at him, incredulous. Stirring things up? Dad, they left her outside to freeze. They're stealing from her. And you just sit here. He looked away, shame flickering across his face. "It's complicated." "No," I snapped. "It's simple. You're letting your son and wife destroy your own mother. And you're too much of a coward to stop it." His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He just walked out of the room, shoulders sagging. That was the moment I knew I was alone in this fight. And honestly, I preferred it that way. The breaking point came a week later. I arrived at the house to find Grandma crying in her room. Her jewelry box was gone, the one she'd had since she was a girl. She told me Anthony had taken it that morning, said he'd put it somewhere safe. That was it. That was the final straw. I left the room, my vision tunneling. Anthony was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like he owned the place. I walked straight up to him, grabbed the cup from his hand, and slammed it on the counter. "Where's her jewelry?" I demanded. He smirked. "Relax. It's just stuff." "No, it's her life. Her memories. And you had no right." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "What are you gonna do, Officer Hale? Arrest me? Make a scene? You don't have the guts. You've always been the weak one." My hands clenched at my sides, nails biting into my palms. I wanted to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face. But I knew that's what he wanted. Something he could twist against me. So instead, I smiled coldly. "You're right. I won't arrest you. Not yet. But when I'm done, you won't just lose her money. You'll lose everything." For the first time, his smirk faltered. Just for a second. And that was enough. I walked out of the house that night with fire in my veins and evidence in my pocket. The case wasn't complete yet, but I could feel it coming together. They thought they were untouchable, that appearances and charm could shield them. But they'd underestimated me. They'd forgotten that I deal with liars for a living, that I know how to peel back masks and expose the rot underneath. And most of all, they'd forgotten who I got my strength from. Grandma might have been frail in body, but her spirit, her resilience, was the foundation of mine. They might see her as a burden, but I saw her as a reason. A reason to fight, to strike back, to make sure justice didn't just come knocking, it kicked down the damn door. The storm inside me had settled into something sharper, more controlled. Revenge wasn't a question anymore. It was a promise. And I intended to keep it. The night of the party, I felt the air shift. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was training, but I knew I was walking into a battlefield dressed up in holiday cheer. My parents were hosting another gathering. New Year's Eve this time. The house gleamed under strings of golden lights. Champagne bottles lined the counters, laughter spilling through the open windows. To anyone driving by, it looked perfect. Picture book perfect. But perfection was a mask. I knew what lay underneath. And tonight, I was ready to rip it off. I parked across the street, sitting in my car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I had my phone in my pocket, loaded with recordings. I had photos of forged checks, missing heirlooms, bank withdrawals. I had enough to scorch their reputations and maybe, if the investigators moved quickly, put them in front of a judge. But it wasn't just about evidence. It was about Eleanor. About the trembling woman I found shivering outside on Christmas Eve. About the tears she shed when she realized even her own children had abandoned her. This was for her. When I finally stepped out of the car, the icy wind slapped my face, grounding me. I pulled my coat tighter, squared my shoulders, and walked straight to the front door. The moment I entered, I felt eyes on me. Guests in sparkling dresses and pressed suits glanced my way, some smiling politely, others curious. My mother was in the center of the living room, glass in hand, laughing too loudly at something one of her friends said. She spotted me and her face stiffened. though she smoothed it quickly into something resembling a smile. "Marissa," she said, her voice honeyed. "What a surprise." "Not really," I said flatly. "Where's Grandma?" "In her room," she replied quickly. "Resting. No need to worry." I could hear Anthony's voice before I saw him. Loud, commanding, like he owned the space. He stepped out from the den in a sleek black suit, his arm around his wife, glass raised high. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. "Another year, another triumph. May we all prosper in 2025. The room erupted in cheers and clinking glasses. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just stared at him until his eyes caught mine. The smirk faltered for half a second, then returned, sharper, smugger. He saw me as a nuisance, a fly buzzing too close. Not for long. When the noise died down, I stepped forward. "Actually, I've got a toast of my own." The room went quiet, the shift in mood immediate. My mother's glass froze halfway to her lips. My father stiffened in his chair. Anthony cocked his head, eyes narrowing. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. A recording filled the room, Anthony's voice, clear as crystal. "She's dead weight. Once the account's empty, we'll dump her in a home. Out of sight, out of mind." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "Did he just say?" Anthony's face drained of color. "That's taken out of context," he barked, his voice cracking slightly. I let the recording play on, my mother's voice this time, sharp and cold. "Do you know how embarrassing it is when she complains? We can't keep dragging her along. It's better this way." The silence was suffocating. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between my family and me. My mother's face burned red, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You manipulated that," she hissed. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the room like glass. "That's who you are. That's how you talk about the woman who gave you everything. While you sat in here drinking champagne, she was outside in the freezing cold, left to die. That's who you are." Anthony lunged toward me, his composure slipping. "You think this little stunt is going to ruin me? I built my career on credibility. No one will believe the cop sister with a chip on her shoulder." I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened the folder I carried under my arm and held up a stack of papers. Bank records. Withdrawals signed in a handwriting so shaky it wouldn't pass a first-grade class. Jewelry sold under her name. Her pension drained into your accounts. You might have everyone here fooled, Anthony, but the state's elder abuse unit won't be so easy. The room buzzed with murmurs. A few guests set down their glasses, suddenly uncomfortable in the company they were keeping. My mother's friends exchanged glances, one of them shaking her head as though disgusted. My father finally stood, his voice strained. "Marissa, enough. This is not the time." I turned on him, my chest tight. "When would be the time, Dad? After she's gone? After you've all picked her bones clean? You had the chance to stand up for her, to protect her. And you chose silence. You let them treat your mother like trash. That makes you just as guilty." The words landed heavy. He opened his mouth, closed it, and sank back into his chair, shame written all over his face. Anthony tried to recover, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "This is a smear campaign. She's jealous. Everyone. Don't buy into her little performance." But then a voice, frail yet steady, cut through the tension. "It's not a performance." Every head turned. Grandma Eleanor stood at the end of the hall, her small frame wrapped in a shawl, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. She leaned on her cane, but her back was straight, her eyes fierce. "She's telling the truth," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "They've been taking everything. My money, my things, even my dignity." I begged them to stop, but they didn't care. They left me out in the cold on Christmas Eve. My own children. My own grandson. And now you all know the kind of people they really are. The silence was deafening. Anthony's face contorted, his perfect facade cracking in front of everyone. My mother covered her mouth, eyes darting wildly as whispers spread like wildfire through the room. "This is elder abuse," one guest muttered. "Disgusting," another said. Anthony slammed his glass down, shards scattering across the floor. "Enough of this circus. Everyone get out." But no one moved. They just watched him unravel. Right on cue, There was a knock at the door. Firm. Authoritative. I didn't even need to look. I knew who it was. Elder Protective Services investigators, with a uniformed officer standing behind them. "Anthony Hale?" one of them said as they stepped inside. "We need to speak with you regarding allegations of financial exploitation and elder abuse." The room erupted. Gasps, shocked murmurs, people stepping back as if his shame might be contagious. Anthony sputtered, trying to pull himself together, but his wife had already slipped away from his side, her face pale. My mother rushed forward, panic in her voice. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding." The investigator raised a hand. "Ma'am, we have substantial documentation. We'll need you to come down for questioning as well." I stood rooted in the center of the chaos, watching as the empire they'd built on lies and greed collapsed in real time. My chest rose and fell, my pulse steady. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something deeper, heavier. Justice. Grandma reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You did it," she whispered. "You gave me back my voice." I squeezed her hand, my throat tightening. "No, Grandma. You gave me mine." As Anthony was escorted out, his protests drowned by the murmurs of disgust from the guests, I caught one last glimpse of his face, stripped of arrogance, stripped of control. For once, he looked small. And that was enough. The party was over. The mask was gone. And for the first time in years, I felt like the house we'd walked into wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the truth. The silence after they hauled Anthony out was almost louder than the chaos that came before it. I stood in the wreckage of shattered champagne glasses and whispers that still clung to the air like smoke, holding Grandma's hand while the life my family built on greed crumbled in front of their audience. I could feel her trembling beside me, but her chin was lifted, her spine straighter than I'd seen in years. The guests trickled out quickly after that, murmuring excuses, avoiding my mother's desperate gaze. No one wanted to be seen lingering in the ruins of a scandal. The grand house, once full of artificial laughter, felt cavernous and hollow as the last car pulled away, leaving only the sound of the heater clicking on and off. My mother collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. My father sat beside her, stunned, silent, like someone had just switched off the part of him that pretended to be in control. I'd seen that look before, in suspects who realized the game was over. Grandma's breathing was shallow, her grip weakening. "Take me upstairs, Marissa," she whispered. I nodded, slipping my arm around her and guiding her to her room. She was light, too light, and that broke me more than anything else. She deserved warmth, food, safety, not this. Not years of quiet suffering under the same roof as her children. Once she was settled in bed, I sat beside her. She stroked my hand with trembling fingers. "You stood up for me when no one else did," she murmured. "I thought I'd lost my family. But I still have you." Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced them back. "You'll always have me. I'm not going anywhere." She smiled faintly, her eyelids fluttering shut. Within moments, her breathing evened out, and she fell asleep. I stayed a while longer, listening to the rhythm of her breaths, steadying myself. But when I finally left her room and closed the door, I knew the war wasn't over. Tonight was only the beginning. Downstairs, my parents were waiting. My mother's eyes were red, her mascara smudged, her face drawn tight with panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed. "Yes," I said coldly. "I stopped you from bleeding her dry." My father spoke this time, his voice low, broken. "She's our mother, Marissa. We didn't mean for it to go this far." I felt a surge of rage boil in my chest. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? You left her outside in the cold to die. You let Anthony rob her blind. You stood by while she wasted away in that house, and you drank champagne in front of her like she wasn't even human. Don't you dare tell me you didn't mean it." My mother stood, her voice rising. "Do you think people will thank you for humiliating your own family? You've destroyed us. Anthony's career is ruined. Our names will be dragged through the mud. What about us, Marissa? What about what we've built? What you've built?" I snapped. "Everything you've built was on her back. Her money. Her sacrifices. And when she got old and fragile, you tossed her aside like garbage. You don't deserve her. You don't deserve the name she gave you." For the first time in years, I saw fear in my mother's eyes. Not guilt, not shame, fear. Because deep down she knew there was no covering this up, no spinning it into something neat and palatable for the neighbors. The truth was out. I left them there, stewing in their disgrace, and walked out into the cold night. The street was quiet, the stars sharp against the winter sky. I sat in my car, shaking, letting the adrenaline drain from my body until exhaustion took its place. The next few weeks were a blur of hearings, interviews, and paperwork. Investigators pored over the evidence I'd collected, matching it with bank records, insurance claims, and testimonies from neighbors who'd noticed Eleanor's decline. Anthony was indicted on charges of financial exploitation, fraud, and neglect. My mother and father weren't spared either. They were charged as co-conspirators. It made headlines. Prominent lawyer arrested for elder abuse. Pictures of my family's house splashed across the news. Reporters parked outside for days. The story too juicy for the press to ignore. The whispers that had started at the party spread through the town, until everyone knew what kind of people my parents and brother really were. At work, some of my fellow officers gave me nods of quiet respect. Others avoided my gaze, uncomfortable with the idea that betrayal could come from so close to home. But I didn't care. The only opinion that mattered was Eleanor's. And she flourished. Away from their control, she began to come back to herself. I moved her into a small but cozy apartment near mine, filled with sunlight and warmth, where she could sit by the window and watch the world go by without fear of being forgotten. I visited every day, bringing groceries, fixing little things, just being present. One afternoon, as I was helping her arrange a photo album, she took my hand and said, "You gave me back my dignity. That's something I can never repay." "You don't have to repay me," I told her. "You already gave me everything I needed. Strength, integrity, the courage to stand up, even when it hurts. That's you, Grandma. That's what you gave me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed my hand to her cheek. Then maybe it was all worth it. Because now the world knows the truth. And I have my granddaughter by my side. The trials dragged on for months. Anthony's smug confidence evaporated under the weight of evidence and testimony. His reputation shattered. His law license revoked. My mother's friends abandoned her. Her social circle gone overnight. My father retreated into silence, a shell of a man who finally had to face the consequences of his cowardice. And me? I stood taller. I spoke louder. I learned that revenge wasn't always about rage or retribution. Sometimes it was about shining a light so bright that the shadows had nowhere left to hide. On the day the verdicts came down, I sat in the back of the courtroom, Eleanor's hand in mine. Anthony was sentenced to years in prison. My parents were handed probation and fines, their reputations permanently stained. They looked back at me once, their eyes hollow, but I felt nothing for them. No pity. No sympathy. They made their choices. And this was the cost. When the judge's gavel fell, Eleanor leaned against me and whispered, "Justice." I nodded, my throat tight, my heart heavy but full. "Justice," I echoed. Later that night, back at Eleanor's apartment, we sat together by the fire, sipping tea. Outside, snow drifted down softly, coating the world in silence. For the first time in years, the holidays felt peaceful, safe, like they were meant to. Eleanor reached for my hand again. "Promise me one thing, Marissa. Anything. Don't let their shadows follow you. Don't let their choices steal your joy. You've already carried enough." I swallowed hard, squeezing her hand. "I promise." Their story ends with them. Ours keeps going. And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had spent months consumed by anger, by betrayal, by the fire of revenge. But now, with justice served and truth revealed, I could finally let go. I looked at her, at the woman who raised me with love when no one else seemed to know how, and I made a silent vow. She would never be alone again. Not on Christmas. Not on New Year's. Not ever. Because family isn't about blood. Family is about who shows up, who protects you when the world turns cold, who holds your hand when the storm passes. And as the snow fell outside, as the fire warmed our faces, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Peace. If this story gripped you, if it stirred something in you, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen betrayal this deep in your own family? Or do you know someone who has? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Your voice matters here.